So yeah, hi. We're going to get started. I just wanted to start off and say a little bit about the MIDI Association. So we are the community of individuals who play and create with MIDI. We started off in 2016 with 0 members, and we now have over 20,000 members in 114 countries. They're all volunteers. Um, so the MIDI Association is run by the MIDI Manufacturers Association. So the difference between the MIDI Association and the MIDI Manufacturers Association is the MIDI Association is for individuals. The MIDI Manufacturers Association is for manufacturers and software companies who make MIDI products. The MIDI Manufacturers Association has a little over 60 different companies that contribute, and what they do is they pay annual dues based on their revenue. So the larger companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft all pay significantly more than the smaller companies. So there we go. Sorry. Hopefully you can now see me. So once a year we run the May's MIDI Month promotion to get donations, and we need that money because we need to be able to keep up the website. We get a lot of pro bono work done by Monday Loves You, which is the web company that hosts this. And but there are some hard costs, and so we once a year we run a donation campaign, and that's what this is part of. So last year, after we ran May as MIDI Month, we were able to work to put together some things so that we were able to add this Horn capability. So Horn is a platform. It's the platform you're using now. We're able to do webinars, and we're able to stream live video from all over the globe. We have people who are joining us today from New Zealand, from California, from all parts of the world, and it's great. So just want to say MIDI is a village. We all contribute and do what we can to make it successful. So if you're enjoying the webinar and you get a lot out of it, we would ask you to do a small donation to the MIDI Association so we can keep doing this sort of stuff. We have a great panel of guests today. We have Moldover, we have Huston Singletary, we have Dr. Kate Stone, Sam Gribbens, Shawn Wasabi is here. Laura Escudé is on the set of American Idol, and she may pop in, but she wasn't able to join us because she's busy. But she has already done a video for us, and it's up on the website, and you can watch it there. So we're going to get started with our first guest pretty soon. MIDI controllers have changed and evolved over the years. MIDI products started out mostly as keyboards, but around 2005, things really started to change and heat up. So let's welcome our first guest, the founder of Controllerism movement, Moldover.
Hey, Ethan, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Good. You get my video? Yeah.
We are.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, can you talk a little bit about the early days of Controllerism from 2005 to 2007 when things were really just starting to get started with controllers? There were some other people involved. I think DJ Shaky was involved. Just talk a little bit about the early days.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about what I know about the early days. I was living in New York City. I was transitioning from being more like a traditional musician, playing electronic music in bands, and getting more and more interested in what I could do as a solo performer. A lot of that was inspired by using Ableton Live in its earliest days and just seeing all the great stuff it could do. And as you mentioned, DJ Shaky was another influential person. I met her Burning Man in 2005, I think, and discovered we were both living in the New York City area, shared a lot of passions for music and creativity, and really wanted to create an inclusive music community around these new ideas of performing with software and controllers. So just a few months after we met, we started a party called the Warper Party, which still continues in New York City. Now celebrating, I think it's like its 13th anniversary or something. And it was basically a monthly event, or kind of like an open mic, but with a lot of differences. But in the spirit of that, like anybody could sign up to perform, and we also had visualists in addition to audio controllerists, and that became the sort of hub of the community that helped me kind of progress as a performer in this way. Oops, sorry.
It's okay. You can answer that
And
if you want.
Sierra Leone calling, Robodial. Yeah, so that was and that's yeah, and then Shaky later became my manager, and so between the two of us, it was me kind of like, doing all this work within this community, stuff that we thought was really, really valuable to others and would inspire others. And New York has a lot of like really amazing talent there. So Controllerism was born of the need, like, just to have a new word. There are all these people who are like, talk about a live electronic music performance, or I do live PA or something, and those all felt like either a mouthful or just too abstract from what we do. And that was the same time that I was starting to modify controllers and realize that, like, I didn't find any barriers in the software realms. It felt like I could create all the crazy awesome software I wanted, but the hardware was really limiting. And it also felt like, well, the controller has to be there. You need a human interface for it to be a true musical instrument, at least in the way that I came up playing instruments, where it's like a connection with your body, and eventually it's just a, kind of emotional output mechanism. And yeah, so it's got to have a physical interface, and thus Controllerism
So,
was born.
yeah, tell us a little bit about the Mojo MIDI controller. I mean, how did you come up with the idea for that? It really was a kind of seminal thing in terms of triggering samples from, buttons. It was one of the first things to really take that approach, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you said earlier, like most of the controllers at that time were keyboard controllers, and you're seeing the first, like, it looks like an MPC with 16 pads, but those are really, legacy interfaces for really specific musical tasks. And as you say, I was triggering sounds and doing radical manipulations, very much inspired by what turntablists do. And I just wanted a more expressive interface. So it began with keyboards. There's a Novation Remote 25 SLMK2 or something like that. I can't remember the entire model number, but that was the first controller that I was just like, I've reached the limits of what I can do with this thing. I need to like rip it apart, put it back together, put some other controllers inside of it, kind of, and that became the Frank controller. And that was the prototype for what later became the Mojo. Kind of when I reached the limits of what I could do hacking up existing controllers, felt like I needed to build something from scratch. And yeah, it was all with the desire to have like really expressive control over the triggering and manipulation of sounds played back from software. And there were things out there, but they were either, kind of like one trick ponies, I guess I'd call them. Like there were multi-touch sensors before the iPad, but they could only do that one multi-touch thing, and you had really good keyboards, which are good for certain kinds of musical expression, but can't do the things that multi-touch sensors can do. So it was just the desire to have a more expressive and kind of multifaceted instrument for for performance.
Did the Mojo have arcade buttons on it?
Yeah, that was that was one of its, and still is one of its best features, I think.
Yeah. So how did who came up with that idea? Was that something that you just kind of were? I mean, the whole connection between the gaming industry and gamers and MIDI controllers is kind of a very interesting thing. But arcade buttons are incredibly responsive.
Yeah, a lot of people ask about that. There is a really strong connection between the needs of a gaming controller and a music controller, right? Like low latency and something expressive and responsive. So there's a lot of fertile territory using game controllers for making music, which is something I've gotten into more recently. But yeah, as far as the arcade buttons and where that came from, that was actually like in the days when I started building controllers, there was very little information about how to do it, but there were some obscure communities. There were like a platform called MIDI Box, which was like totally told you how to build a MIDI controller from the ground up, and you could do some really advanced things. And so I had seen one or more controllers that had arcade buttons on it, but it was really my friend Ben Lurie, who has a company called Visionary Instruments, and he builds custom guitars. And I think it was in 2006 or maybe it was 2005. He had built an entire laptop computer into a guitar, made the face of it the screen of the laptop, and then he put a MIDI controller in it too, and he put one arcade button in there, and then he had me do all the kind of programming for it, set up the effects on the guitar, and have them controlled from the face of it. And the arcade button, I was like, that is the most fun. I put mapped it to like a pitch control, and it was the most fun thing on the instrument. And that's when I realized that, like, yeah, arcade buttons, at least as far as I was concerned, were going to be like the crossfader of controllerism.
So a couple interesting things that you did, I think. You eventually made the Mojo project open source so people could, build it. And then you took the design of the Robocaster and made it available as a MIDI designer template for Guitar Wing. So it seemed like you were really trying to take the things that you had built and allow more people to have access to your projects. Is that kind of something that's in your, talk a little bit about why you went to open source?
Yeah, well, it's always been important to me, just to like share information and enable others, to express themselves. I'm not exactly sure why. I think maybe it's just where I came from. A lot of my heroes are teachers and mentors, and not so much, the musical artists that I look up to and emulate. And I just think that's kind of important as far as like building a better world, making us all happier human beings. So yeah, from the very beginning, I mean, even where I made the connections with all these people, was a place that was all about inclusivity and community, and going back to Warper and working with DJ Shaky, like those have always been really important things to me. So yeah, wherever practical, like to share the design of an instrument, or if it's going to be like a super high quality and thus expensive performance instrument, to try and make something less expensive and more accessible. That's always been important to me, and just to give others the chance to do what I do, and then hopefully like build on it too. It's like that's what I realized at a certain point is like there might be this fear that if you give away your secrets, if you give away too much information, somebody's gonna like rip you off, copy it, steal it, whatever. But it's much, much, much more likely that they'll actually take it, learn from it, become inspired by it, and build upon it something even more wonderful and exciting. And to me, that's more important.
Yeah, it's almost like there is something in that philosophy that is very MIDI-like. I mean, that is the whole thing about MIDI. MIDI not only connects products together, it connects people together. It is basically open source. I mean, the MIDI specifications are closed until they're become official. But as soon as they become official, they go up on MIDI.org, and anybody can download them and hack them up and do whatever they want with them. So there's something kind of, I think, a shared vision. Could you have done what you did in your career without MIDI?
That's a good question. I mean, I wasn't making electronic music before MIDI, so for me, it's always been an ever-present thing, and I think it's great. I mean, when people talk about what's wonderful and exciting about it, it's a lot of it's like the legacy. It's the fact that like instruments built 30 years ago, you can plug into, a piece of software made today, and it just works. And you can't point to any other communication protocol that's had that kind of longevity. So yeah, for me, it's always been a thing that connects things and a thing that just works. And whenever people have pointed to its limitations, that's the other conversation, that topic that comes up around MIDI in general, there's always a way to make it work, either to embed it in another protocol or, yeah, a lot of it's mythical to people talking about limits on resolution and latency, and that's really not a problem. So yeah, MIDI has been an inspiration for me.
Cool. Yeah, actually, we are working on MIDI 2.0, and so some of those limitations that people talk about are gonna go away. So thanks so much for sharing your story, Moldover. Great story. I think people, who are watching and people who will watch it later on when we post it on MIDI.org will really enjoy that. So I'd like to introduce our next guest. He was the head of Serato from 2004 to 2014. Serato was founded by fellow New Zealanders Stephen West and Alan Burstenshaw. After leaving Serato in 2014, Sam founded Melodics, and Melodics is a desktop app that teaches you how to play MIDI keyboards, pad controllers, and drums. So please welcome Sam Gribbens. So you were at Serato when digital DJing really first started. Can you just talk a little bit about those early days and how? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Yeah, sure thing. I remember I joined Serato right at the beginning of 2014, and Scratch Live, the first DJ product that we made, was a happening thing but wasn't out yet. It was very near being released when I joined, and I think my first jobs were like organizing beta testing, writing the user manual, those sorts of things. So it was right just before it all launched, and it was a super exciting time. My background had been that I studied electrical engineering many years before that, and at that time when I was at college, or university as we call it down here in New Zealand, I was learning to DJ, and I had this idea that, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could control music on your computer using your turntables? But I really didn't study hard enough and have the ability to solve the problem technically. But I really was fascinated by the problem. And that was part of the reason I actually went off and lived in Amsterdam for many years. There was a company up there called, the company was called Into IT. The product was called Final Scratch, and I was kind of keen to go and find these people and meet them and see if I could team up with them in some way. That didn't really happen, and I was kind of a little bit bummed out that I hadn't got in on this thing right at the beginning. And then I randomly, out of the blue, got an email from an old friend of mine who was like, I met these people in Auckland, and they are making this product that's a lot like these ideas that you've been talking about for ages. So I came back and I met AJ and Steve, the guys that founded Serato. And I said, I've been thinking about this thing for a long time. It had actually been 10 years at that point. And I've got lots of ideas and lots of thoughts. And they're like, yeah, we meet lots of people who have lots of ideas about this because it's cool stuff. And it's like, no, I have really been thinking about it. And basically convinced them to hire me. And that was like, I got in, it was amazing, just before it all really kicked off.
Cool. So, when did you first start seeing the integration of MIDI into digital DJ setups? It seems like it was almost, people were using different MIDI controls almost as I want to say as a competitive advantage, something to differentiate themselves from other DJs.
Yeah, I mean, it was right near the beginning. So what quickly became apparent, the thing that really I think made Serato take off was the practicality of it. It was the key to the success was it meant that touring DJs could travel without having to check their precious vinyl into the hold of the aircraft and pay crazy fees to have all of their vinyl shipped around the world with them and run the risk of losing it all. So it was actually that kind of just straight up practical side of, like, I can have my laptop with me in the cabin with me, and that is my music and my life. That's what really made that initial success, I think. But pretty quickly, people realized that there was a way to use this technology to really enhance the way they were DJing. And there was one guy called DJ AM, that we spent quite a bit of time with at the beginning. And he in particular, he had this line as like, Serato is like, it gives me a third hand. And I went and watched him play lots of times, and he'd be doing things he'd be doing things with the software that we hadn't even realized were possible. Like he had this trick, for example, where he would load up a track and play it. And we had this command, Control Z, that undid the last track load, and it was like Command Z, undo, made sense to us. But what he discovered is it would put the track back at exactly the point you'd left it. And so he'd do things like mix in to the very last minute and then hit Command Z, and it would drop the track back in at the right time. And we had kind of cue points, markers within the track, and they were mapped to the keyboard on your computer, the number keys, cue point 1, cue point 2, cue point 3 on the number keys. And he'd be reaching over to his laptop and kind of like playing the track using these keys, using the laptop keys. So pretty quickly we're like, well, that's pretty cool, but it's kind of dumb to do it with a laptop. We need a device that has big buttons on it. And it's really funny listening to Moldover, because of course my first thought was like, arcade buttons would be really good for this. So I made this prototype that was this thing that was turntable height, so it sat between the turntable and the mixer, had a bunch of arcade buttons on it, and it was just for hitting the cue points. And very quickly it was like, there's a lot of potential in this, and that kind of fast forward a few years led to a lot of the hardware devices, and now it's very, very standard for all sorts of DJ products to have rubber pads on them. And it can be used for like getting your track ready and being able to, very quickly mix or quickly move between tracks or find the right part in the track that you want to play, but also used as a performance, as a way of performing. And that's where cue point drumming or finger drumming, in a DJ sense, really, really kind of started to take off.
And that kind of leads to melodics. You left Serato in 2014. You started Melodics. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Melodics uses some web MIDI, if I'm not mistaken.
It's not web MIDI. It is just MIDI, but we use MIDI extensively. So, I mean, like under the hood, Melodics is a sequencer, basically. And so the way it works is that there is a piece of music loaded up as a lesson, and in order to help you learn to play this piece of music, we chunk it, which means we break it down into steps. Here's step 1. I'll talk a little bit about like the start of Melodics. We started with finger drumming, and yeah, there was definitely this kind of crossover from my DJ days. I'd seen that both in kind of what I'd seen and how DJs were performing, but also I'd worked with a lot of the companies making DJ equipment and making musical instruments in general, and I saw that heaps of products had pads on them. This was in kind of 2014. You walk around the NAMM show and there are keyboards with pads, there are DJ controllers with pads, and then there are the kind of drum machine, MPC style, launch pad, push style devices that are just pads. And they were everywhere. And I was thinking, there's a very small number of people in the world that really know how to play these, and lots of people are buying the gear, and lots of equipment makers are making the gear. And there's a big opportunity to help people learn how to do this, because it's cool stuff and people want to learn, and it's pretty hard to learn off watching a YouTube video, especially as like the really cool YouTube videos were incredibly intimidating, because these people were like totally shredding it, and it's pretty hard to watch and then think about how you could learn how to do that yourself. So we built Melodics with MIDI as the backbone of it. As I said, it's kind of like a sequencer under the hood. We play a MIDI sequence, and then we capture how you're playing and compare what you're playing to the ideal and then feed that back to you. So it's like, I mean, a friend of mine described it in the early days. It's like, all right, so it's like Guitar Hero for drum machines. Like, yeah, I guess that's actually a pretty fair way to describe it. And the idea is that we help you to learn to play these things, but what we really put a lot of work into is helping you kind of get into good practice habits. The key is to be able to practice, and so it's all about drilling those practice habits.
So how important? Obviously, you said that Melodic uses a lot of MIDI. I mean, would Melodic even be possible without MIDI?
No, I mean, not at all. The thing is that we make our own music. We also work with artists and license their music from them to turn into lessons, and so we'll get that music in various forms. Sometimes it's just the recording of the individual stems, and then we'll cut it up and basically turn it into a MIDI sequence. And so one of the things that we're working on a lot at the moment is like analyzing your performance. So like capturing the MIDI and looking at it and then being able to say, okay, we can see that it's like your 16th note timing that is the thing that you need to work on. That's what's holding you back a little bit. So we're going to give you some exercises to help you drill those things. Cool. So yeah, I mean, MIDI is really, really fundamental to it. And if we get, say, the stems are saying from an artist, then we basically cut it up into a MIDI sequence and recreate it as a MIDI sequence. And then the other thing about the way we use MIDI is the way that we actually interface with the instruments. And so like when you plug in your keyboard or your pad controller or your electronic drum kit, we are able to identify what device it is from its ID, and then be able to really customize the software to fit with that device.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us here. I think we're going to introduce the next guest, and the next guest up on the list here is Mr. Huston Singletary. Huston is the lead sound designer for preset creation at Ableton, and Ableton has been at the center of Controllerism for years. And I know that you have one of the most badass collections of MIDI controllers on the planet, Huston. Can you just talk a little bit about how Ableton approaches MIDI, how you use it in sound design? I know you have some controllers that I would love to get my hands on.
Cool. Yeah, well, I think that's kind of two questions. Controller keyboard wise, yeah, I'm also a synth collector, as you know, and many folks know. So with that comes controllers as well. I actually sent a picture to you guys earlier of one of the gear closets that has this sort of arsenal of controllers of all shapes and sizes, from launch pads to trigger fingers to that kind of stuff. So, but to stay on that for a second, I think what's really interesting when you look at MIDI and you look at controllerism, and like what Matt was talking about earlier in the webinar, I was thinking about this today. I think it kind of comes around to this piece of gear called a trigger finger, which kind of made its debut around 2003 or 2004, and that took that paradigm of the MPC 16 pad type approach and even though it was fewer pads, it took that pad technology and put it in front of everybody from MIMM Audio. And so that was a really interesting sort of shift that went from the sort of concentric stylistic way that you would play and produce and program with an MPC, which is where I came from back in the 90s before I got into the computer world. Ableton, incidentally, coincided with that as well, going back to around 99, 2000, in the very early days of Ableton. After a couple of years, as Ableton got into versions 2 and 3, that's where, at least, and I wasn't part of this revolution, actually. I was more in doing studio work and other things, sort of non-controllerism type stuff, actually. I was a keyboard player and a session player and a drum programmer. So I guess controllerism, if you look at it from the drum programming aspect. But that's how I made my living. But back to Ableton. So Ableton, right around 2 and 3 and getting into 4 when MIDI became available, that's where everything came together. because MIDI was then accessible through Live to folks like Matt and other talented folks who I actually remember. I'm going to put Matt on the spot for a second. I actually remember meeting Moldover. I say Matt was Moldover. When I remember meeting Moldover in New York right around the time when he was speaking about earlier, and we were somewhere in this room, and he just completely turned the controller input aspect on its ear with Reactor, his Novation controller, and some other really interesting pad design type stuff that he had. And so that sort of seeing that and then knowing that pad technology was getting on controllers was getting to the point where you could do some really good velocity type accents and action with the pads. Not that the MPCs couldn't do that, and even at that point I want to say the MV8000, some other, and some Yamaha gear. And what that made me realize that I could switch from, or sort of work side by side with, as a keyboard player and playing drums on the keyboard, to applying it to pads. And that's where sort of that revolution started with me. But I couldn't have done it actually without Live, Ableton Live, and the pads getting to the point to where it sort of left that drum machine paradigm, if you will, those sort of where you would pull it, the velocity sensitivity and the feel. That just didn't do it for me, and that's why I stuck to keys, doing all my drum stuff and acoustic kit recreations and things like that. So, so I think it was really interesting how those two things sort of collided: Ableton Live and that controllerism, pad controller type model that was available to the masses. So you could suddenly get into, you know, your launch pad or your you know, like Sam was alluding to, but there was a point, and there still is actually, where every keyboard had pads, Novation and Yamaha and Roland, and everybody, when you Roland Phantoms, and you know, everybody remembers that. And it was an interesting thing. And certain pads you can play easily, and then some just ergonomically weren't right for users. And that was something that I always sort of watched and looked at, and I thought was interesting. And then when folks got it right, well, I say folks, when companies got it right, that the product would just take off. And you know, whether it was Push or Machina or any of those kind of products, even, you know, S404s or whatever it is, it's about where the hands lay and where the pads lay and how they feel and how they work together, and then taking that technology past that point back into the computer. That's a whole nother conversation. That's a different conversation. But the artistry of controllerism and MIDI kind of all met in that time frame, right in that 2002, 2004 kind of range. So that's kind of how I kind of viewed that. That's what kind of channeled me back, like I said, sort of me being a MIDI guy and a synth guy and a session player and a producer into the controllerism world. So around 2004, 2005, that's when I started doing all the crazy finger drumming madness that I do. So
I think that's one of the interesting things about MIDI is it, you know, it started off with this very simple goal of let's just plug two keyboards together and get them to play middle C, but it has continued to evolve as music has evolved and as new forms of music and new artists come around. Somehow MIDI, just, you know, in its good old 7-bit form, has still managed to be transformed by different people at different times to fit what is going on in the world. And you know, we're pretty excited about, you know, we've seen web MIDI, we've seen MPE, and very soon we're going to see MIDI 2.0. It's pretty exciting to think about what's going to happen, you know, 10, 15 years from now with all of the new technology. Wherever you are, you always think, oh, you know, is there something else to be done? And there always is that new frontier, which is very cool.
Sure. Yeah. You can look at that. You can sort of look at it. You can sort of earmark the last 25 years or so. I fell into MIDI pretty strong around 93, 94, mid 90s. I came, like I said, out of the MPC scene as a programmer and a producer, and really just kind of more of a programmer guy. Like I was tons of records in the early 90s to the mid 90s, and just being the synth programmer session guy. But I was always on MPC. I loved the way it felt. I was always productive with it. I could stream out and connect my different modules. But then the change for me and how MIDI propelled me to continue the path that I was on, and I say this in all honesty, was when I got my first Mac. I got a program called Opcode Vision, a license from a colleague, installed it, and basically realized, oh my God, I can channel 16 times 16. I can take all these synthesizers and all these drum machines and take one cable, go into one module or one keyboard, go through that to another one, through that to another one, put them all on separate MIDI channels and create these orchestras of sounds at the touch of a button on the computer. And when that started, when I figured that out and realized having these different MIDI interfaces and having it all very, very elegant and simple yet productive, that it changed everything. And that was 1 year mark. Then you fast forward about 10 years and you have companies like iConnect MIDI, the evolution of USB MIDI in 2099 or whatever that was, and I remember it like yesterday, where it was like, what is this cable? What is happening? What is Apple telling us we have to do now? Oh, this USB thing, But that changed everything too. Just today, I realized, all I need to do is just put this USB cable in this synth, and I'm going to be able to hear it, audio and MIDI. And I did the things I needed to do with the sound design or whatever. So it's really interesting. MIDI changed the way that I approached music and the way I worked for a living, literally, in the mid 90s, and that carries all the way through today. It's just different now. It's a mixture of MIDI cables and USB, and obviously a lot of it's in the computer, as opposed to MIDI interfaces and MIDI cables and all that stuff. But I was just winding up a couple of MIDI cable snakes the other day, because I was doing some routing and some stacking sound design stuff with some different old legacy modules that I was doing, which it's what I always do anyway. So, and I had to get MIDI into these 35-year-old modules, MKS 30 and a MKS 7 and Kurzweil or something. And I hunted down the cables, put them in. They would work like a champ, like you said. It's coming down that pin connector, and it just works. And I think, not just speaking for myself, but anyone who kind of came up in that era of the MIDI explosion on the scene remembers it in a great way, because that changed the way we worked. It's like it made you work more efficiently. It made you want to work, because you could stack things and you could do things with velocity and you could map things, and it was great. So obviously very passionate about it, because it's still a huge, very huge part of my daily workflow.
We can certainly feel your passion for MIDI. Well, we're gonna move on, I think. Thanks for joining us, Huston. And the next person we'd like to invite up to join us, I'm not actually sure where Dr. Kate Stone is. Hi, Kate. Do you want me to turn your? I don't know if you're hooked up via video. Oh, there you are. Hello. So exactly where are you? Are you in New York?
Yeah, I am. I was due to be camping, but I decided I wouldn't have a very good connection, and you wouldn't like to hear me via Morse code. So here I am from New York City.
Well, thanks for joining us. So you have a very unique approach to controllers. You are the CEO of Neva Lea, a company that does interactive ink. Could you? I mean, I have to say that some of the things that you have done at South by Southwest are some of my favorite uses of MIDI, because they're very they're interactive, they're very inclusive. Could you just talk a little bit about some of your favorite MIDI controllers? I know you have hats and notebooks and walls of MIDI.
Yeah,
it's great. Just tell us a little bit about it.
I wish I had my baseball cap on, which I left it at home. When I touch my baseball cap, it triggers air horns. via Bluetooth MIDI, air horns, gunshots, laser sounds, whatever, which is kind of fun. And I have my notebook with me though. So this is a songwriter's notebook, and in the back, oh, if you can see it, this is the songwriter's notebook, and you can write down your song and play something on that, and then you can call it back and use that as a MIDI controller on a notebook.
So, Kate, tell us about what you've done there, because that's just that's a special ink that you guys have created, right?
Yeah, sure. So what we do is we print conductive ink stickers. So we make these stickers in various sizes, from the size of a notebook to the size of a wall, and we've printed stickers that are maybe 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide. And so those conductive ink stickers, we then press a little circuit board on that has a Bluetooth chip on the circuit board, and on that Bluetooth chip we've written software for capacitive touch and for MIDI. So when you touch the poster somewhere and the poster has a graphic on it with the ink behind, the chip knows where you've touched, and then it Bluetooths off to either a smartphone or a MacBook, and it's running Bluetooth MIDI. And yeah, so at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, what Adam's referring to, we made these 8-foot high walls that were 20 feet long, and they had these awesome graphics all over the wall, and you could touch them in different places, and there was a few hundred different touch points on them. But because we print it, we can print it in any shape or pattern we want. So there was lots of different instruments, and just all different sorts of shapes and colors, and you'd touch them, and then each one would send off a different MIDI command. And I think we had about 8 different Bluetooth boards, and each Bluetooth board has 26 touch points on, and all of those Bluetooth boards were paired with a MacBook running Ableton. So we had all these different channels coming in, and we had a huge set, and we could control anything from that wall, and it was really fun. And we ran that into silent disco headphones, so people could put on these headphones and hear this experience. We did one also at Nocturnal Wonderland. We did a MIDI garden, so Nocturnal Wonderland in LA, and we made these trees out of large cardboard tubes with paper flowers on, and we had the 2-meter diameter mandalas on the floor that you could walk on, and we had bowls of water that you could dip your fingers in, and all of those were controlling an Ableton set to a 4-point sound system. And we actually mentioned it to some people at NASA that we're going to do this, and they said we should use NASA space sounds. So we created a NASA space sound soundscape, and controlled it from flowers on trees and mandalas, and that was a lot of fun too. It was tripping a lot of people out, and
nice.
They were already.
So Kate, maybe tell us a little bit about how this sort of the inception, because surely this is not something that was just obvious, like, hey, let's print MIDI controllers and have them wirelessly doing this. So where did this all stem from?
Yeah, so I mean, so since a kid I've been fascinated with connecting things, with having buttons and dials and things that you can press buttons on and make some sounds come out of somewhere else. And then when I started my business using conductive ink and how to connect things, as about 6 years ago, I think I was asked to do a talk at TED, and I wanted to show something that was just really different, of something that you could do with paper. And the weirdest thing I could come up with at the time was to make a piece of paper become DJ turntables that you could scratch on and run a crossfader and do start and stop and do some sound effects. And when I told my colleagues I wanted to do this, they thought I was crazy. But I do the thing where I tell them we're doing this no matter what. And we had to find a way to do it. And so what we did at the time is we used one of our pieces of print with what was an audio chip stuck on there that we had capacitive touch software on. And we then wired that in over SPI to a small PCB that was running Bluetooth. And then we Bluetoothed that to, I think, a Beagle board that had a Bluetooth 4 dongle plugged into it. And we also then, we got I think a Newmark DJ controller that was linking into the DJ software. Well, there's software called DJ. Trying to remember all the names. And we figured out what all of the commands were for that, and then we emulated them on USB on the Beagle board. And so with that kind of elaborate setup behind the scenes, in the end of the TED Talk, I was able to take a piece of card and scratch and mix and pretend that I was a DJ, which I'm not. I just pretend, and make it be controlling my iPad. And then that was really cool. And then DJ Cuba saw that talk and then contacted us and asked if we could do his album cover and put paper-thin DJ decks into his album cover. And of course the answer's yes, because my answer's always generally yes. Okay. And the guys behind DJ were part of this, the company creating DJ with Cuba, and they told me that Bluetooth MIDI was just about to become a thing. So the first thing we were able to do was, because of iPhone 4S had Bluetooth 4 on it, so that was the first device to come out with Bluetooth 4. And then with iOS 8 coming out, that was going to include Bluetooth MIDI, and there was no way of getting hold of that protocol. And so I discovered that if I joined the MIDI the MIDI Manufacturers Association and became part of the working group to help form that standard, then I'd be able to get hold of the protocol and then get that into the things that we created. So we make these really fun controllers out of print, but without standards, it's absolutely impossible to make any of these things work. And the two standards for us are Bluetooth 4 and MIDI, and that is just what enables us to connect things together that just work. So we just massively appreciate the fact that there are these protocols, and know that it's impossible to do without there being standards.
Kate, thank you so much for joining us on that. We'll be shifting over to questions in a little bit, and I'm sure we've got some for you. So
can we bring up our next guest? I was very lucky the other day. Shawn Wasabi came down to Yamaha, and we spent a couple of hours. Hey, how you doing, Shawn? So we spent a couple of very frustrating hours, and we were like, why can't we get MIDI into the disc clavier? Why can't we get MIDI into the disc clavier? And then we realized what the problem was, that the in cable was going to the in jack on a 5-pin DIN, and that's not the way you do it. Unfortunately, you got in to out. We learned that. It was an analog problem. I saw you had some controllers in your hand there.
Yeah, actually. All right, so these are the switch controllers we used the other day when I was at Yamaha. Yep. I also brought the MIDI Fighter 64 with me. Also, shout out to Kate on that last interview. I love those products. I remember I hung out with DJ Cuber a long time ago, and he showed me the album that Kate worked on and made the MIDI controller. Like the outside cover of this album, you can press buttons on the cover of it. It's an artwork with like conductive ink, and you can press buttons on the ink and it plays sounds from the album, which is like the coolest thing. And this was back like a long ass time ago, but I vaguely remember that. That was so cool. And I love hearing about it. Like I didn't even know about like the Songwriters Notebook and all of that. Like I want to check out those products for sure.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit about the MIDI Fighter 64, because I mean that was kind of one of the first things that you worked on, and it's got arcade buttons. So you must owe a debt of gratitude to Moldover, and right?
Yeah, Moldover, to Ian Golden, to Mike Mitchell, who is the engineer I worked on when we made the MIDI Fire 64, it was with Michael Mitchell, and he made it in his apartment with a 3D printer, and we got this other person, Look Right, to laser cut the top, and then we got the Sanwa buttons from DJ Tech Tools, who have a supplier in Japan. Yeah, and we actually, the original prototype we made of the MIDI Fighter 64, we gutted 4 smaller MIDI fighters and just took the insides of those, and that was like the brain of like the original prototype, just funny enough. So like it was sort of a MacGyver situation when we first made the thing.
Yeah, they called Yamaha has a word for those. They call them dirty prototypes. It's just like you're just going to hack stuff together, So yeah,
I'm keeping that in my vocabulary. I just learned that today.
Okay,
that's funny.
So it's time. I told you we were going to get very serious on this webinar. So I mean, where the heck did you get the idea to take boba and a soda machine and make them into MIDI controllers? That's just insane. What were you thinking?
Oh my god. Oh yeah. I actually have so many weird ideas like that. Or like I have a notes folder full of ideas that I come up with every morning. I brainstorm so often. And like the boba video and the drink machine and like the popsicles and like the switch were all part of like my brainstorm folder. So I think the day I made the boba video, I went to Boba Guys. They had a shop that they opened recently by the studio I work out of. So I ordered like 3 different drinks, trying to like, I wanted to take the drinks back to the studio and try to like mess around with like the boba balls and all, or like try to find something to do with the straw, or like even the drink itself. So I ordered a bunch of drinks from Boba Guys, the Makey that I got recently, and that was like the precursor for like all these weird ideas with objects.
So what? Can you? Yeah, absolutely. Can you hold that up for a second? What is that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's a bunch of wires first of all, but underneath these wires is a printed circuit board. It's made by these 2 engineers from MIT, and what this does is like all of these little metal parts connect to different parts of the keyboard. So like when you touch, or like actually, so this bottom part is like the ground connection, and when you touch this, and then you touch another part of the Makey, it plays a key on the keyboard. So like you have the space bar, you have your click, you have your mouse. These go left, right, up, and down. And on the other side, I don't know if you can see it, but there's like W, A, S, D, F, G. So these can go to different keyboard keys. And Ableton, luckily enough, can play MIDI notes with the keyboard. So there's like 2 different conversions that I went through for like doing the boba video, and like the other stuff was I had like the boba connect to the wires, and these would all go to the corresponding keys for those notes. So W plays like a C3, A plays C sharp, S plays D, and so forth. And using that's how I was able to like trigger sounds through MIDI in Ableton with the Makey. Funny enough.
And there was a piece of software that you had in the middle that was kind of right?
Yeah, for the Switch controllers especially, the Switch controllers do like, I think it's called SID signals that you can connect. Yep. So you can connect this via Bluetooth to your MacBook or even to your phone as well. But so you need to convert those signals so they can be read by Ableton. So Ableton can't like read any game controller signals, but it can read keyboard keys and MIDI. So I had this program called Enjoyable. I don't know who makes it, but if you Google Enjoyable MIDI, you'll find it. You can find it on Google, and it's basically a program that you can just press keys on or you can press like buttons on your game controller, and then you press a key, and it'll map that out to that specific keyboard key, and that's how.
Oh, that's
so. Yeah. So this goes into Bluetooth. The Enjoyable program converts it into keystrokes, and then Ableton reads the keystrokes and converts that into MIDI. And when we were at Yamaha, when I was at Yamaha the other day, I converted those keystrokes into MIDI to be sent to the disc clavier piano to play the keys in your facility, which is like super fun. That's it.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, and I mentioned this, and I hope you don't mind my asking, is that when you were doing those experiments, you never got frustrated that things weren't working. It's like you have, I call it fearlessness. Like you're not afraid of failing. Like you're not afraid of just jumping off a cliff and you'll just think you'll land on your feet. Is that part of kind of your whole art, the way you approach experimenting?
Exactly. I'm glad you appreciate that. Yeah, I learned pretty recently, or at least I used to overcalculate a lot and think too much about things, especially being creative. And like when I would write songs, I would spend way too much time overthinking steps of the process, or like even like going way too much into music theory, or like going way too much into the composition. But I learned recently that all the stuff that sounds great and sounds fun and is like fun to like play with, that's the stuff you don't think about. It's like more recently when I started coming up with these sketches for like doing videos, and they're like mental exercises. Like I can wake up and like come up with an idea and try to like do that idea by like mid-afternoon. So like I try fleshing ideas out as fast as possible. Like when I came up with the Drink Machine video specifically, I got that done in like the matter of a day. Where like I hit up all my friends, like, hey, who has a restaurant and would let me come to their restaurant and play their drink machine? And luckily enough, I got someone in downtown LA. His name was Phil, and he was just like, yeah, come on right over. Didn't even ask questions. Wasn't like, what are you gonna do with my restaurant? He just had me like come to his restaurant and like watched as I attached wires to his drink machine and filmed myself playing the drink levers. Yeah.
So you recently said on Twitter, never let them know your next step. But I have a couple of ideas that I want we need to work together on. And when we pull off this next project, people are going to go. It's gonna be fun. So so I think what we're gonna do now is we're gonna maybe open it up for questions from the audience. We're a little bit over 4:00, but we still have a bunch of people who are still listening.
Sweet.
A collab confirmed. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I have a very weird idea that I can't even tell to Shawn yet. But Lawrence knows what it is.
I can mention stuff. You probably, I know you guys are geniuses, so like I won't be surprised.
So cool. So if nobody has any questions, we had yes, sir.
There were a couple of questions that came through earlier, and because of some strange stuff, I don't know what they were. So there was one person in particular, and if you know who you were asking questions, feel free to put them on the wall, and we'll try to take them right now. I know one of them the first one was a question when Moldover was up, and we can go ahead and get the rest of the panel to just turn their video on, even if they like. See if we can really break this thing. Let's see if we break this thing. Everyone turn their video on that's on the panel, and I'll even do it. I'll give away a secret about my special way of wearing my headphones. But it was a question about an MPE and what Moldover saw. And I think this goes for everyone on the panel about how MPE is affecting the work that you're doing and what your expectation is with the MIDI 2.0 standard in terms of how you expect that'll affect the work that you're doing. Although we haven't announced anything about exactly what it is, but still.
Right. That's exciting. I'm just really excited to see like higher resolution and like have, it's like watching TV in 4K as opposed to like the olden days of Nintendo 64. Like having that happen with MIDI protocol.
Yeah,
What's your favorite thing?
absolutely. I mean, I think the high resolution is a big thing, but then the other thing is we're going to be able to have true per note controllers. So the way that MPE works is it's kind of a kludge, in that what you do is you rotate through the 16 channels and you only have one note per channel, which is kind of a way to do per note controllers, to fake MIDI out so that you can do per note controllers. But if when we have real per note controllers, you'll be able to control you'll be able to have as many boba balls as you want and send them to each individual instrument. So that'll be fun. So Shawn, actually, one of the questions was for you, and the question is, Shawn, what's your favorite thing you've ever sampled? That's a great question.
Oh yeah. I think for song-wise, it started with Marble Soda, and there's this part in Marble Soda where it's a vocal sample with really chill Rhodes chords under it, and it's sampled from this Perfume song. I forgot what the song is called, but it's that part that people play in when they go on TikTok and they make videos of themselves dancing to the song Marble Soda. They specifically go to this part that goes like, and it's like it's literally like just it's a vocal from the Perfume song, and I forgot what I need to listen back to it, but in Marble Soda, it's that section that's the favorite thing I've ever sampled, and I'm talking about like songs. But in terms of objects, I'm thinking, what's the best thing I've ever sampled? I don't record a lot of things. I use my voice memos app a lot when I do sample sounds in the outside world. And for the most time, it's like people in the studio singing, or like sometimes it's like really good melodies that I hear out in the world, and like those are the stuff that make it into my voice memos, and I airdrop that to myself, go into Ableton, mess around with it, and I think that's right. Yeah, I'll leave my answer right there. Cool.
Well, listen, I want to thank everybody on the panel. I know we had some technical difficulties, but we'll be able to take a look at what got recorded, and I think there'll be some funny parts where I'll be like frozen for like 5-6 minutes. That'll be good. Hey, it is all it's all good. Thanks for all of the people who hung out through the entire hour.
Thanks for coming to this.
Yeah. And, I do have to do this. The only reason that we can do all of this stuff and put up all of the articles is if people like the 20 listeners who listened throughout this whole webinar, go online and donate, $5, $10. We're trying to raise $2,000. And our corporate sponsors will turn that into $22,000. So it's actually a pretty cool thing. If you donate $10, it becomes $110. That's, how often can you get 11 times the value in something? So I want to thank everybody. I think we're going to actually turn off broadcasting, and maybe the panelists can hang around for a little bit, and we can have a little chat with not everybody watching us talking. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Catherine, thank you. You're amazing. That was fun.